Here I am with Steve Cunningham, a person that is truly very important for me in my as a person, as a professional. You really changed the way I become to be an investment banker, and I'm really glad to have you here, Steve. Thank you very much to for participating in the podcast.
Well, Jose, the feeling is mutual. We met each other at very interesting times in our careers, and as I will hopefully get into it in terms of discussing how we initially met and how we initially interacted, and how that changed our perspective of each other and how we flourish going forward.
Thank you very much, Steve. We can certainly enter into that. If you who are listening to us take forward, you will know that Steve, at first, he didn't like me. Actually, I think he hated me. Right? It wasn't easy at all because I was at Deutsche Bank, and here comes this gringo out of the Morgan Stanley, where he was the king of the castle, and there was this Jose Securato, very curious, very inquiring, and we didn't start off with the right foot, but we eventually got there.
Jose's absolutely right. So I joined from Morgan Stanley with a colleague of mine and a colleague of Jose's, and I joined from a period of time where 2 years prior or 3 years prior, Deutsche Bank had I don't know, 70, 80 people focused in the investment banking area in terms of Latin America. But when I joined, there was really just Jose and maybe one other person from an investment banking standpoint, and the whole idea was to come in and rebuild it. And so it was it was an interesting time to go to Deutsche Bank and they and do that. And Jose's also right. So I had a little bit of experience by that time in terms of having built platforms at other firms. And I knew my way around Brazil, and different people from Brazil would be calling me, CEOs of this company, CEOs of that company, government officials, heads of banks, and it didn't matter because Jose would sit outside my office and he would hear, "Oh, that's Arminio Fraga on the phone." It didn't seem to matter to Jose. I like, does Arminio Fraga call everybody all the time? He didn't. He certainly wasn't impressed. That I can tell you, not back then.
Well, not really true, but that's okay. So, Steve, you still have, right? Because still working, you're still a banker. You have an amazing career. You started a long time ago, and then you built the Bear Stearns franchise in Brazil that catapulted you to build the Morgan Stanley franchise in Latin America, and then we've met at Deutsche Bank.
Right.
I want to go back to the beginning of your career, and talk a little bit about how did you build the Bear Stearns platform in Latin America, and then you went to Asia. I think that part of the history is really amazing. It really interests me.
Jose, it's a fair question, but in order to give you the full benefit of building the Bear Stearns background, I think it's very important that we go a little further back, because the Bear Stearns background was built on, to be honest and fair about it, the Continental Illinois Bank background.
So, all right, let's go there.
What happened is I went to business school at Columbia University. After Columbia University, I was recruited to Continental Illinois, which at the time was one of the top 5 or 6 banks in the United States. I had spent time on the domestic side, but came in contact with the head of Latin America who liked me, even though I had no background in visiting Latin America, no Spanish, no Portuguese. And so against my will, to be true about it, they asked me to join the Latin American group when I finished my Continental Bank training, against my will.
Okay.
They put me at a desk in Chicago, and they had me studying Spanish and working on Mexican transactions.
All right.
But 3 or 4 months into that, they then asked me to take a trip to Brazil. This is 1979, just to give your audience, some perspective. And in 1979, they asked me to go to Brazil and visit our office, the Continental's office there, and work on a restructuring. I did that, and I came back, and they said, how did you like it? I said, I loved it. It was great. Brazil's an amazing place. And they said, well, you did a great job. We've thought about it. Would you talk to your wife? We want you to transfer in a month. I said, what? I don't speak Portuguese. I barely can speak 2 words of Spanish. You want me to go to Brazil? Yes, you did a good job. And the people in Brazil liked you. You should go to Brazil. I said, okay. I went home and I told my wife, I said, look, this is a locura. This is crazy. I mean, they're asking me to go to Brazil after like a 2-week trip on a restructuring. I think it's time to think about another career path. My wife said, Steve, this is great. We're young. We're in our early 20s. When are we ever going to get a chance? And Brazil's a fabulous country. You tell them we're going. Let's go. And then we went. This is Continental. So I go to Brazil, and there was an American who was in charge. There was a couple of Brazilians, and there was a Paraguayan, and then there was me. I was at the
Wow.
bottom. I was an American in Brazil in my early 20s. Taking Portuguese lessons in Brazil and giving me accounts and giving me financial statements to analyze. But I ended up meeting a number of interesting people during that stage in terms of just cold calling in broken Portuguese, calling on banks, calling on corporates, and meeting different people, and began to build the business. Why is this relevant? And I'm going to come back because you asked me about the Bear Stearns background, because within a year I was put in charge of Brazil.
Wow.
So we had a little less than around 700 million, give or take, of exposure to Brazil, and I got elevated to run Brazil. First thing I did was buy a leasing company from American Express. Then I began to readjust our business, from a lending business to more of an advisory business, and less reliant on lending. But I made a number of different contacts, and I also developed a number of relationships. So who are some of the relationships that I developed? This is Continental now. Well, I developed a relationship with a bank called Banco Garantia.
Yeah.
Back then.
I have heard of them.
Yes, Banco Garantia. This is the Banco Garantia that you know of Jorge Paulo Lemann, Marcel Telles, Beto Secupira, Claudio Haddad, Roberto Thompson, a whole series of people, that were ultimately part of the Garantia, family, whether it was Alex Baring, Bon Cristiano, Ferson Lambrano, a whole series of people. That came from the Continental experience.
Wow.
Then there was calling on a bank that is now part of Unibanco, that is now part of Itaú, called Unibanco. Who was the person of my contact there? Andrei Jaworski. And so a whole series. Then there was the relationship with a corporate called Duratex. The owners of Duratex were the Setúbal and the Biela families. All right. I mean, so a number of relationships and the foundations of different experiences and contacts were developed from the Continental bank years, and businesses were built in those years. I built very interesting business from my Continental bank years, tied to, as you look at the early 1980s, the developing countries around the world were going through a debt crisis, and debt needed to be restructured. Well, the Brazilians put in a plan, and part of the Brazilian plan that they put in was called the debt equity conversions. So they allowed international debt to be converted into equity in terms of different subsidiaries or certain operations. Well, I turned that into a whole business, both for refinancing balance sheets, as well as a currency for acquisitions, as a currency for CapEx. In terms of the local subsidiaries, then it became a nice business. I left Continental in Brazil and transferred briefly to London to learn the Euro markets. From London, I went back to the States and built upon that business that I told you about. Then I got recruited to Bear Stearns, where I ended up taking advantage of that and advantage of my relationships to continue to build a business in terms of Bear Stearns in a broad, investment banking way. Also, it was during the Bear Stearns years where I began to develop and recruit a number of people to help me build that business. I had a partner who built it with me for the 10 or so years that I was at Bear Stearns, called Peter Drittel, across the board. But on the Brazil business per se, there were a number of key people. For example, Luis Fraga,
Mm.
who's obviously partners with his cousin Arminio Fraga in Gavia. He helped me build out, Bear Stearns do Brazil. Nicholas Reed, Celso de Barros, Kerry Hall, Eduardo Centola, a number of different people, but not only those people, Ricardo Lacerda, Carolina Lacerda. I mean, think about the teams, that were being built. You asked me about building out Bear Stearns. You build it out by, having a vision, but also having, the great team supporting you build out that platform.
So when you went to Bear Stearns,
Mhm.
you were back to New York then?
I moved back to New York from Chicago, correct? And I went to Bear Stearns. And at Bear Stearns,
But
I
were
had a
you
debt.
responsible for Latin America, or you went to the domestic side at Bear Stearns?
No,
At what function did you go to Bear Stearns at the
I
first
went to
place?
Bear Stearns and to team up with a gentleman by the name of Peter Drittel, and our jobs were to build what they called an emerging markets business. That
Emerging
business
markets.
could be debt, could be debt trading, could be investment banking, could be equity trading. We had this whole region to ourselves, the whole world to ourselves, if you look at the emerging markets. And our job was to build an emerging markets practice. We had desks on the trading floor, and we had desks in the back for the investment banking, the private side business. And the two of us sat there. The chairman of Bear Stearns, the CEO at the time, was Alan Greenberg. He sat at a desk not too far from us, overseeing all of it. And initially, we built it up in terms of, the sales and trading of fixed income instruments. All right.
Mm-hmm.
That then, changed into a business which became, an advisory business. So corporate restructurings, debt corporate restructurings for corporates in Latin America. That also evolved into a new issue business as it relates to more the short term. So a number of different, institutions that you would be aware of on the Brazil side, people like Banco Safra, were frequent issuers for us on the short to medium term side. And that then grew from the financial service into the corporate side. So you had restructurings, you had, new issuance, and then it moved into M&A advisory as well as equity underwriting and equity sales and trading. And we began to add a number of people at the same time as we were building out this business, sort of across the region in Latin America, principally, Brazil, Mexico, and Argentina, but then, gradually throughout the whole region at Bear, where, certainly, when I left, we had, one of the most important franchises in the emerging markets and in Latin America overall. Because of the success of our business in Latin America, we were asked to expand that business in Asia, which we did,
Mm-hmm.
both, in China, Hong Kong, across the Asian region, in terms of broker dealers, equity underwriting, M&A, fixed income underwriting. It also expanded into fixed income derivatives, equity derivatives, a broad-based business. And it became a very successful, very important business to the firm overall, both in percentage of global investment banking revenues, global equity revenues, and global fixed income revenues. Myself and my colleague Peter Drittel got put on the board of Bear Stearns in the early 90s. And we, built out a very successful business for Bear Stearns across a variety of different businesses. Brazil being very critical, to that growth and development across a variety of different, industries and sectors.
Okay. So just to make sure I got this right. So you lived in Brazil during the continental Illinois
Bank days.
time.
I lived in Brazil. My wife and I arrived in Brazil in 1980, and we
Uh-huh.
left Brazil around 1984 in São
4 years.
Paulo.
All right, all right. And then the Bear Stearns times, you were back to New York then.
First, a short period of time in London, then back to Chicago.
Oh,
No,
Chicago.
Bear Stearns was in New York. Correct. You're correct.
Okay. And then you covered Latin America and Asia from New York.
Correct.
And
Latin America, Asia, and all the developing world. So we built out a very nice business, Jose, obviously in Asia, but we also built out a very good business in Eastern Europe, right? Turkey, sort of, globally. Yes, it was a very good, business. IPOs to some of the largest, Turkish companies. As well as a whole series of debt transactions and advisory transactions across certain parts of Europe, as well as Asia, as well as Latin America.
that's amazing, Steve. I didn't know about. I knew about Latin and Asia. I didn't know about Eastern Europe. And knowing you, and from experience, you like to be involved. Did you travel to all these countries?
24/7. You were living on a plane because we were building, our operations. We were continuing to expand our operations and grow them within Latin America, but in many cases we were building de novo, our operations both in Asia as well as parts of Europe. And
right.
I mean both brick and mortar as well as human capital, and obviously the transactional aspect of that.
So, okay, I want to have a better sense of how was it to build all that. So you started with sales and trading.
We started on sales and trading, and you're talking about going back to the early days of Bear in Latin America.
Yeah. So you started with sales and trade. So some people who are listening to this, they don't know how do you make money on sales and trading?
How do you make money? You identify certain assets that one holder has that may have one value, and you find another holder who has an interest in acquiring it, at a different value, and you're the middle person or the person who stands in between, and arbitrages those different values. So, in my particular case, from a sales and trading basis, going back to my Bear days, as I told you, in the early days, the sales and trading in those initial years at Bear Stearns were bank loans.
Okay.
They were not fixed income securities. There was not CP, there was not MTNs, there were certainly not bonds as we know bonds today. So you were talking about bank loans. So you were buying bank loans from one set of banks, selling them to another set of banks, or as I explained to you, I helped create the whole secondary market for what were called debt equity swaps. What did that mean? You created an entire universe of buyers who were interested in acquiring those bank loans at a discounted value because they could use that as a currency to capitalize their subsidiaries by buying it at one price, bringing it back to Brazil, and then capitalizing it into their local subsidiary at a higher price. So if you bought the Brazilian bank loan at, let's say, 70, the way the debt equity program worked back in Brazil in those years, the Brazilian government allowed you to capitalize that, retire it at par in local currency. So that became a very important currency. And then there were swaps worked off against that. I'll give you a perfect example. Petrobras had quite a bit of outstanding receivables. And those receivables were outside of the restructuring that was happening across Brazil. Those receivables were trading at a discount. The discount on those receivables back then earned the investor a rate of return of close to 22 to 23%. We were able to swap those receivables against the bank loans and then move them on to the some of the end buyers, corporates and others that were looking to inject capital or use it as a currency to expand their operations in country. So it was a little bit more than just buying bank loan A and selling bank loan B.
Okay, but then you were using Bear Stearns' balance sheet to do that.
No,
so you actually
no. This is all agency.
Oh, it's just agency.
Yes.
Fantastic, Steve. That's
all agency trades in the early days. Yes.
All right, and then you built the advisory business.
And the advisory business. So different groups called up to hire on the restructuring of bank loans of their indebtedness. And again, if you go back, remember what they first asked me to do at Continental Bank in 1979, in 1979, in my first trip. It was to work on a bank loan restructuring. All right. So I had already been exposed to bank loan restructurings even during my early Continental days. And so that then came about on a regional basis, as well as both on a Brazilian basis as well as on a Mexican basis, and in other countries, across the region.
So it was more focused on restructuring, not so much on mergers and acquisitions.
Initially, but part of the restructurings led to mergers and acquisitions. One group, and that's just the natural, effect. So in advising one group on their restructuring in Brazil, they owned a number of assets, which they were looking to monetize. So since I was doing the overall restructuring, I was also hired as the advisor in the disposal and the sale of those assets.
All right. All right. And then you built the new issue business, which means you were.
And I built the new issue business. Well, I built the new issue business sort of simultaneously. It started off, as I said, initially on the short-term side in fixed income. Okay. Because you need to understand, there were very few, bond offerings, if any, in those days. Okay. Yeah, so people basically started off by first going into the market on what was called commercial paper. Then commercial paper got extended into MTNs. Then MTNs got extended into long-term bonds. So that's on the fixed income side. All right. Simultaneously, as you may or may not be aware, there was very little activity in terms of equity underwriting, and certainly very little, almost no activity as it relates to international equity underwriting. So whatever equity underwritings and IPOs and secondary offerings, that took place either on Bovespa in Brazil or the Bolsa in Mexico were tied primarily to local offerings being sold locally. What I developed with my colleagues, my partner Peter Dertel and others, was and the colleagues that I mentioned whether it was Luis Braga and all the people, Kerry Hall, Nicholas Reed, all the different people on the Brazil side, was the build out of the equity underwritings, for Brazilian issuers.
All right.
Okay? Part and parcel with the sales and trading effort of that. So we developed an extremely strong, dominant sales and trading of all equities, certainly in Latin America and in most of the emerging markets. And in some cases, in those years, we had close to, close to 50% in certain securities.
Wow. And investors were US based, US and Europe based.
They were global. Yes, that's right. But we had global investors, both US, European, and some outside of that, as well as other countries and within Latin America, as well as.
But Brazil investors were very little, right?
In the beginning.
Okay. And then, so when you started, first day at Bear, você and your partner, you and your partner, how big was the team?
That's the team, me and my partner. I sat here, he sat there. I told you we had these two desks on the trading floor with an office in the back.
So you look at him, he look at you and say, "Hey, let's do it."
That's it. Let's go.
Wow, Steve, that's amazing.
And we would walk in every day with a plan. We worked, 7 days a week.
Okay.
Saturdays and Sundays were like normal days, for us. We worked very hard, very, very, diligently in terms of what, building out a practice.
What impresses me the most is that your wife didn't leave you.
My wife, my wife is everything to me, and my wife has been supportive to me from the age of 16.
Wow,
16 years old. I met her when she was 15 and I was 16.
That's fantastic. I didn't remember that part of the story because
she's responsible, as I told you in the beginning, for the move to Brazil.
Yeah, amazing. Yeah. When I met Camila, she was 15 and I was 17.
See, very similar.
Yeah, amazing. And when you left Bear,
here's how I left Bear.
All right.
So in 1993, myself and three other guys were responsible for recruiting a gentleman by the name of Joe Perella. Joe Perella is famous on Wall Street. Joe Perella built an extremely successful, practice for First Boston. which then became Credit Suisse First Boston, a hugely successful. He left First Boston with Bruce Wasserstein and created Wasserstein Perella. Then he left Wasserstein Perella and interviewed with 3 firms: Morgan Stanley, Merrill Lynch, and Bear Stearns. I was part of a team of 3 or 4 of us at Bear Stearns, whose job it was to recruit Joe to Bear.
All right. Okay.
And Joe sat in my office for lengthy periods of time, for several days. I was trying to recruit him, but he was interviewing me. If we fast forward to 1996, Joe called me up and said, "Steve, would you come over for lunch? I'd like you to have lunch with me and some of my colleagues at Morgan Stanley." And I said, "Joe, I'm not interested. Steve, just come over and have lunch with me and some of my colleagues at Morgan Stanley." And his colleagues at the time included, he had me meet with John Mack, a gentleman by the name of Terry McGee, who was, Joe's number 2, but a whole series of people, including eventually, soon thereafter, Dick Fisher, who was the chairman at the time of Morgan Stanley. And they explained what their vision was for Morgan Stanley and how they felt that I could be helpful to them in realizing, their vision by making the move from Bear Stearns to Morgan Stanley. And that was in 96.
That was 96. Amazing, Steve. And then you joined Morgan Stanley.
I joined Morgan Stanley, and I joined Morgan Stanley. But when I joined Morgan Stanley, I was very fortunate because Morgan Stanley had a couple of people there from Latin America, and they had a couple of incredible people. One very well known who became one of my closest friends, and his name was Francisco Gro.
All right.
A very famous Brazilian and deserves all the fame. A brilliant economist, but a brilliant banker and incredible person. He was there. But one of the things that we negotiated on my joining Morgan Stanley was that I felt in order to be successful, to have Morgan Stanley successful, is we needed to demonstrate a full commitment in Brazil. And what did that mean? That meant buying a Banco Multiple license from the Brazilian government, because in order to be successful in Brazil, Morgan Stanley had to show full commitment to the country. And full commitment meant a full-blown Banco Multiple license, which we entered into and bought and opened up soon after I joined Morgan Stanley.
All right. So you're responsible for that.
I was helpful and certainly in terms of that. And that was one of my discussions with them before I agreed to join.
Okay. And how big was the team, Morgan Stanley team in Brazil, their practice here?
So the team became we kept growing it all the time, with a number of different people, obviously we had to hire, but the very first employee was an American. Because I got a call from the central bank after we got approval from the license, and they said, you need to have the office opened in a week, and there needs to be an employee in the 2 employees at least in the office a week from this day. And so I went to the different employees, and one young person raised his hand.
Okay.
His name is Charlie Stewart. Charlie Stewart raised his hand and said, "I will pack my bags and go to Brazil, and I will be your first or second employee opening up Morgan Stanley do Brazil." So Charlie did that. And then we expanded quite a bit, where we had, the full platform of banking, equity sales and trading, fixed income sales and trading, everything there. And we had a number of, people that, a number of people, are well aware of, who worked on that platform. Maybe some of them were initially in New York, and many of them, in Brazil. I mentioned a number of the names on Bear Stearns, whether it was Rick and Carolina Lacerda and a number of those people. But let's take a look at Morgan Stanley. I mentioned Francisco Gro, all right, but you had Paolo Passoni. You had a whole series, Cristina Penteado. You had Graciela Bertoletti. You had just a whole Marcelo Najaborin. You had, just a whole series of different people, who worked, sort of across the board. Richard Lark, was there. Carlos Colon. I'm reading some of the names as I recall them. Alex Borges, okay, the COO of FSBO. just a whole, series of different people. And I'm sure I'm forgetting, and, Levine dos Santos, Rodrigo Lowndes, just a whole series of different people. Andrew Tisdale, who ran it for a number of years, Alberto Chirali, a whole series of very talented people. And again,
Wow.
going back to the Bear days, I forgot to mention someone who was very helpful in building out that platform, who a number of people know, Will Landers. Okay.
You are at Morgan Stanley, based in New York, but now differently than Bear, your mandate was solely LATAM, right?
Yes. Yes. My mandate was to make Morgan Stanley the leader in investment banking in Latin America. And that was my initial mandate. Then the mandate got expanded as we developed an architecture which was similar to Bear Stearns. The architecture at Bear Stearns was an integrated sales, trading, banking, combination of businesses under ultimately one umbrella, and we ended up going in that direction towards the end of my career at Morgan Stanley. But my initial mandate was to build it out on the M&A side, on the equity underwriting side, and on the fixed income side in Latin America. Correct.
And I have to ask this. You met Ian Reid at Morgan Stanley, right?
I met Ian Reid at Bear.
A Bear.
Ian Reid was extremely helpful to me at Bear, and I recruited Ian Reid from Bear to Morgan Stanley. He was the first person I hired, when I joined Morgan Stanley, I believe, outside of a couple of people who were already there.
All right, all right. So, as a tribute to him, tell me about the young Ian Reid you've met at Bear.
He was a young guy working in the U.S. M&A department, a British,
Okay.
citizen who was working in the U.S. M&A department at Bear Stearns. As I told you, we started to develop our merger and acquisition and our restructuring business at Bear Stearns. We needed additional help. And so the head of the M&A department and I sat down at the U.S. M&A department, and I said, I really need some help. And he said, I have this young British person, Ian Reid. Let me speak to him. Ian came over. We hit it off immediately, and he never went back to domestic M&A. He became a full-fledged member of the Bear Stearns Emerging Market Group, and was instrumental, absolutely instrumental in building it out. Now,
Wow.
there's another person that I need to mention if we're going to talk about that, and you've heard me say this, Jose. One of the early hires, and it was somewhat similar to my experience with you. As we were building out the number of employees at Bear Stearns, we were talking about different people, and one person came up, was a young banker at a bank, and her name was Rebecca Miller. Rebecca Miller came in to interview us, and when she interviewed with me, I thought she was okay, but just okay. I thought she was good, but not incredible. But we made the hire, and she joined us. I can tell you, and you've heard me say this, I'm not just saying this for this podcast, Rebecca Miller is the greatest investment banker I have ever met in my entire life.
Yeah.
Bear Stearns, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, Nomura, BCP. Rebecca Miller is far and away the greatest, international or domestic. There has never been, and who knows if there ever will be, an investment banker like Rebecca Miller. Ian Reid was up there, as you know, but Rebecca Miller was far and away the greatest.
All right, and you brought Ian Reid with you to Morgan Stanley.
I did.
And then you brought Ian Reid with you to Deutsche Bank, where I met you.
Correct.
Both. And then when you left to Nomura, I founded Paul Advisors, and then I brought Ian Reid with me to be my partner.
You took Ian Reid, and I saw that as a great combination, because you're a brilliant banker And he was a brilliant banker. And I said, what a powerful combination.
Yes, yes. How about that, huh, Steve?
That's amazing.
Unfortunately, he passed away, and I miss him every day.
I do too. I do too.
All right. So, how long? For how long have you stayed at Morgan Stanley?
I joined Morgan Stanley in 96 and I ended up leaving Morgan Stanley in 2006.
Oh wow, 2006.
So it was around close to 10 years at Morgan Stanley.
That's a
I
lot of
left
fun.
Morgan Stanley to go to Deutsche Bank.
Yes.
You
How
know.
about that?
All right. And so um, Morgan Stanley did not have anything except for sort of a small, business in Mexico when I joined, but not very much. And I gave you the experience in terms of the build out in terms of Brazil with the Banco Multiple and all that. Deutsche Bank was very different, as you well know. Deutsche Bank had brick and mortar, had operations in Brazil and in Mexico and in Argentina and in Chile, brick and mortar. But the investment banking platform, which had been, at least from what I had been told, 80 people 2 or 3 years prior, was down to you,
Yeah,
Jose Secorato, and Frank Hegeman in New
yeah,
York. And that's
yeah.
it. That's all it
That's it.
was. And so I was recruited to Deutsche Bank by a number of ex-colleagues of mine from Morgan Stanley, Jim Deneau, because they had seen what I had done at Morgan Stanley, and they said Deutsche Bank needs to do the same thing that Morgan Stanley did. And Steve did it at Bear, and Steve did it at Morgan Stanley. He can do it for us at Deutsche Bank. It was a little different because at least at Deutsche Bank there was brick and mortar, and there were two people, you and Frank Hegeman. But and I spent more time with you, and because as you know, Frank eventually left the firm and ended up doing something else with Banco Pator.
But then you brought Ian Reid, you
And I
brought
brought Ian Reid.
Rui de Castro, and we started building the team. So from two people, we went to 27 or 29. I don't even
We did,
remember.
and we started to do that, sort of across the region.
Yeah,
So, and across product lines. And so we brought in, Thomas Wang. We did internal transfers with Enrique Pani.
yeah,
Tito Vidaure, who was the country manager for Deutsche Bank, for Mexico, had been the country head as well as the head of investment banking with me at Morgan Stanley.
mm,
And we ended up, adding to that platform in Mexico City. And then in terms of Brazil, they went through a transition when I first joined. Roger Caran was just leaving. Alex Auji was taking over as country manager. And we ended up building out the platform on the investment banking side, and then sort of across the platform on the Brazil side through the recruitment of Bernardo Parnas, Jaime Singer, Valdo Perez, Carolina Lacerda, a whole series of different people. Obviously, we had you, initially in New York, then eventually in Brazil. But we began to, continue to build out Eduardo Mieres, who was an internal transfer. Caio
then we brought
Costa.
Caio
Okay,
Costa.
I don't want to miss any of the important people. Caio Costa was critically important, and as you know, brilliant banker as well. Who I recruited, to work with me at Nomura.
And there was Joe as well.
That's right, Joel, yeah.
Joel, yeah. Yeah, there was interesting times. I had a lot of fun, a lot of fun.
But you see the common theme: having great people working with you, amazing people. Bear Stearns, Morgan Stanley, Deutsche Bank, with a shared vision for excellence and serving your clients and building businesses leads to the achievement of becoming the number one and the best investment bank in terms of the areas that you're focused in. And we
Yeah,
achieved that. I feel we achieved that at Bear, Morgan Stanley, and we achieved that during the time that obviously the Deutsche Bank was committed to Latin America. They've gone through sort of changes in their commitment at times.
then you went to Nomura, and you're now at BCP.
That's right. Then I went to Nomura, and again, all right, so Nomura had a small rep office, and the idea was to build that out, similar to the other practices, not necessarily with the full-blown broker-dealer bunk of multiples that I had at Morgan Stanley or that I inherited at Deutsche Bank, but a broader practice which included M&A, equity underwriting, as well as the debt products, at Nomura. Now Nomura had a rep who had been with the firm Nomura for a while, who was very well known, Georgia Ruda, who's gone on to do very good things, with Cooperativa Sudamérica. And then we had Daniel Rodriguez, who I had originally had working for me at Morgan Stanley, from one of the original teams, and I brought back. And I called Caio Costa because he's an incredible banker, and I brought Caio in, and we began to build up, the team there. Fabricio Negrão as well, at a more, mid-level, and we began to build up the team. And again, both from an advisory and an equity underwriting business. And you saw it from our Deutsche Bank days. We did a number of transactions, one of which you're quite familiar with at Deutsche Bank, which is the Ultrapar Braskem Petrobras acquisition of Ipiranga on the advisory side. That wasn't the only one, but that's one that a number of people can relate to. And certainly in the case of Nomura, it was a very large transaction involving CVRD and Mitsui on the advisory side. We go back to the Morgan Stanley days. What a number of people are well aware of is the privatization, obviously, of Telebras, the privatization of CESP, CPFL, and Electropaulo. But there's a whole series of other transactions, both advisory, equity underwriting, debt transactions, convertibles, that were done sort of across the board at each and every one of those organizations.
All right. At Nomura, did you buy?
Then I left Nomura. I've left at the end of my time at Nomura. I co-ran the U.S. and obviously I had Latin America. So I had the U.S. responsibilities as well. Then I joined one of my oldest friends from my continental days, Randy Pike, a true visionary, a true pioneer in terms of the build out of an emerging market platform, who he and I have been friends for 40 plus years, competed against one another, done deals together for years, okay, and had been talking about joining. And I joined him at the end of 2019 with a colleague from Deutsche Bank, Alvaro Cunto, another brilliant banker who worked on advisory with me both at Deutsche Bank as well as at Nomura, to build out or to continue to build out the platform that we have at BCP. And there's in that context, I inherited a number of incredible bankers when I walked into not just the leadership and the vision of Randy Pike, but also James Harper from a debt capital market standpoint, Bulat Kalitov, but more importantly, Bruno Orlandini, a brilliant banker, a Brazilian banker, who has built out our Brazilian business, which today acquired a DTBM license, a full-blown Brazil broker-dealer. And you see a pattern there, run by one of the most outstanding, again, bankers that I've come in contact with, and that's Bruno Orlandini.
I hope he comes to the show as well. I hope he comes to the podcast.
He needs to be on your show. He must be.
A quick question.
And Randy Pike, given his experience, because Randy, very much, from start in the late 1980s, built this great practice, okay? Across the world, obviously, with a focus on Latin America, but the, most important, investment banking, fixed income oriented practice, since the late 1980s to today, which is a 100-person firm, offices around the world, DTVM in Brazil, operation in Mexico, operations in other countries, and that's through Randy's, vision, fortitude, and just a great leadership.
Fantastic, Steve.
And Randy lives half the year in Brazil.
Really? So he can come here on premises for the podcast. All right, fantastic. Just a quick question. At Nomura, have you bought a banking license or a broker dealer's license?
No,
No. Okay, so you missed that because you
no,
did
no, no,
for
no. So
Bear. You,
I bought a leasing company at Continental.
yes.
I had the chance, Jose, to buy an equity percentage in a Brazilian investment bank during my Continental days.
Okay.
We had the chance. It was voted down by people above me.
All right.
Then you know about my experience at Bear in terms of the build out, in terms of building the different platforms at Bear, where at Bear, I bought, it built from scratch full-blown broker dealers in Asia, as well as in other parts of the world, and doing different things, and in Latin America, and then Morgan Stanley. We spoke about the Banco Multiple and different operations. Opened up Morgan Stanley Argentina. I mean, a variety of different. At Deutsche Bank, they had the broker dealer licenses across the world.
Yeah, that was there for 100 years. So yeah. All right. That's fantastic, Steve. That's fantastic. I had to ask you. I'm sorry. Is there anything that you haven't done that you still wish to do? Is there anything left in the playbook of an investment banker that you wish that you still want to do?
I I want to continue to do the things that I've done my entire career, which is build incredible businesses with great teams of people. And I am having more fun today than I've had, in the last, 40 years, working with Randy Pike and my colleagues here at BCP, building on an already first class, business model that they had, but adding to it and building it out and growing it, i.e., with the, build out from scratch on the DTVM in Brazil. That's excites me, but also it excites me working with a group of clients that I've worked with for the last 40 years and continuing to bring value to them. So, those kind of things, excite me, motivate me, inspire me, both on the personal side as well as on the pure professional side. And I'm having an enormous amount of fun doing that.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Steve. Before I wrap up this part of the show, tell us about BCP and what can you do to help your clients achieving their goals in the region.
BCP, as I mentioned to you, was started by Randy Pike and a couple of partners, but Randy is the founding partner, and he has built this for the most part with him and his partners to one of the leading investment banking businesses, primarily on the fixed income side, fixed income underwriting, sales and trading, both on the short-term side as well as on the long-term side, and fixed income instruments. They have a world-class debt capital markets business and liability management, world-class fixed income research, and world-class fixed income sales and trading. They've built that over the last almost 30 years in terms of the build out, and they've continued to provide insights, products, distribution, knowledge, structures to their products. They've got the ability to be able to distribute fixed income securities as well as convertible bond securities like no other firm on the street. They have over 1,800 different accounts globally. They're able to tap into those on a basis which no other firm on the street can compete with. So they've got this unique capability, which as it gets exposed to clients, they understand very quickly, and they become longstanding clients of the firm. And those that start as clients of the firm always continue because they're always very satisfied with the services that BCP provides. And I'm speaking mostly on the fixed income side as well as on the convertible bond side. And they've just done an amazing job. Now with the DTVM in Brazil, we have begun to expand that in the local market, as you can imagine. And that's beginning to develop quite nicely, with the recent opening up of our DTVM in Brazil.
And what type of company, of Brazilian company, makes sense?
Well, we've worked with all sorts of Brazilian companies, Jose. From the Brazil side. So we've worked with CCR, both on the advisory side as well as on the private side. We've worked with FSBO, okay, on the public side. We've worked with banks, Banco BMG. We've worked with other banks. So we've worked with mid-sized banks. We've worked with large banks. We've worked with large corporates. We've worked with smaller corporates. We've got a nice group of different firms, both firms as well as financial institutions that we've worked with, both from the standpoint of an investment banking standpoint, and it's much broader when we look at the sales and trading, both on fixed income and as I mentioned, the broader platform in terms of other security sales and trading efforts.
Fantastic, Steve. Thank you very much for everything you've done, for sharing this story, which is fantastic. And I wish you luck. I'm glad you're having so much fun nowadays. You inspire me. You are an example, a role model. Thank you very much.
But don't forget, again, I forgot to mention, and again, I was talking about a number of the different people who were critical to the build out, and there's a number of people that were incredibly helpful, brilliant bankers, that should become, that I need to comment on. Dominica Noronha, an absolutely incredible banker during my Morgan Stanley days, went on to play a major role with the Laurenson Group, in Brazil. Just an incredible banker, not just in Brazil, but across the region. Guilherme Stiegel, his own financial advisory practice, 44 Capital, just an incredible banker, both during my, Morgan Stanley days and post Morgan Stanley. And I'm sure I'm missing some others, but those two, are noteworthy and need to be included in terms of helping me accomplish some of the goals that I get credited with, but we're really a team effort.
Fantastic, Steve. Well, if you remember any other names, just drop them off.
I will.
Você está gostando do que você está ouvindo? Então você precisa conhecer um pouquinho dos nossos outros canais nas mídias sociais. No Instagram, tem 2 que são importantes. O investmentbanking.br, tá? Focado em investment banking, e o da Bankers Academy Brasil, focado em estudos para o mercado financeiro. Tem um outro que é muito legal, que é o mentoria.bankers Academy. Nesse, você pode conversar através de mensagens diretas com um mentor que estudou o meu livro inteirinho e sabe tudo o que eu falaria para as perguntas que vocês normalmente fazem. Afinal, é assim que esse livro nasceu. Dá uma olhada e me manda uma mensagem. Me conta o que você achou. Now we go to the second part of the program, where we talk about career. My goal is to help college people and youngsters who are starting their career in the financial markets to excel and improve. Okay, so this is this part. Steve, regarding career, team building, you've built so many fantastic teams in so different platforms under different circumstances in different years and times, right? And there's one thing that is common, which is the quality of the team. How do you do that? How do you find out which banker is good and which are not? What are the elements common to all those great bankers that you've worked with?
Great question, Jose. Great question. And it is an art, not a science. It is an art, not a science. And I say that as someone who's been in the business for a long, long time, but it is an art, not a science. You meet young people who have an interest in getting into the financial service, the investment banking business in particular, and you get to know them. And there are a number of certain traits that all of the real successful bankers all in my opinion, share. You are one of the most successful bankers that I met at a very young age, and I recognize that, and you see it. What do you see? Number one, you see a deep, deep, desire, to learn and to understand and to grow and to challenge and to take that into a stage where you can deliver it to your clients. So you're always thinking, and you're thinking not just within the box, but outside the box. And you're constantly challenging yourself. You have to, that has to be combined with a work ethic. It has to be combined, with a level of achievement which is far and beyond the rest of your peers. You have to set the bar very high. You can't just meet the bar, you have to exceed the bar. And you did that, okay? And a number of the people that I've referenced in terms of my background, in building businesses, all showed me that. They showed me a desire for success, but not just the desire, but the willingness, to put in the effort and to challenge themselves intellectually to accomplish those goals, and to work with others to accomplish those goals, and to learn from others, and to learn from the market, and to learn from clients to reach those objectives.
How do you identify those traits in a person you're talking to at the first time? I know it's difficult. I'm my question is almost unfair, but I have to ask, Steve.
Sometimes it's not unfair. Sometimes, and I've said this to many young people, I have interviewed young people who are in college or just graduated from college. And I can tell in those interviews that they can be amazing bankers, absolutely amazing bankers. I mean, I mentioned, Rebecca Miller.
Yeah.
Rebecca Miller doesn't have an MBA. I mean,
Uh-huh.
she was an amazing banker before she left commercial banking, and she joined investment banking. Dominica Noronha, I also referenced. All right, and I don't just mean to highlight those two in particular. I mentioned yourself. I've mentioned Charlie Stewart, my first employee in terms of Brazil, had an undergraduate degree, not any kind of a master's degree. But you recognize in a number of young people, at a very early age, and I've told you, I've interviewed people that I can tell, Paolo Passoni, we've talked about Paolo Passoni, who eventually went back and got a master's, both in business and public administration. All right, but he didn't have to. And I remember talking to Paolo and saying, Paolo, you don't need to do this. No, but Steve, I want to. Paolo, you can be an amazing banker. He goes, I know, but I want these other experiences to decide if I want to be a banker, or do I want to do private equity, or do I want to do hedge funds? Do I want to be a private investor? I had these conversations, and I've had it with a number of young people. I had it with you. You could have done a lot of different things as a young banker, and I remember having this conversation with you. But you can see this, at least I can see this very early on with a number of young people, and it may or may not be very fair, but you can tell which ones really, have, what it takes to take themselves to that exceptional level. And you can meet a number of people who can be successful, but not necessarily exceed the highest levels of excellence.
So we covered that. We know what it means to be successful in your eyes. We talk about recruiting, like what are you looking for in these people. But there's one other element that is important, which is how do you train these people? How do you spend your time? You invest in them to make sure they reach their highest level. And in that context, I want to share with everybody that is listening to us my personal experience with you, because one day we were at 60 Wall Street, 42nd floor, and you call me in your office and you basically said, Jose, I love you. You were a great banker. You really good, but you too hard with the junior people. I want you to make them love you. They respect you. They understand you. They think that you were a great banker, and they know you don't mean harm, which is great, but that's not enough. I want your team to love you. And that was the first time anybody ever told me that. Because basically, you follow the examples that you have. So, how do you nurture a great team, a great investment banker, and put my comment in that perspective?
I think I'll speak for myself. When I started off in the business, I first of all, when I started off in the business, I tried to bring young people in and give them more than they thought they could do. It wasn't where they were given something that I knew they could do it. No, I gave them something that I wasn't sure that they could get it done. Certainly not get it done in the time that I needed it, or get it done sem erros, without any errors, without need for any changes or alterations. And early in my career, I was probably too tough on them in terms of my expectations, and what I expected, and I may have been very, very aggressive on how I interacted with them. But
Okay.
I learned over time that not because they weren't incredible bankers and are incredible bankers, those that are still in banking today, that you need to do more than just be a great teacher and be a great mentor, and be in part and parcel in doing that is also teaching them how that they can work well together as a team, and creating a cooperative and a positive environment. It's not just, people talk about the carrot and the stick, and it can't just be the stick. You need the carrot as well as the stick, and it needs to be, a function of the situation. And if someone makes a mistake, sometimes mistakes are made not necessarily because of carelessness. Sometimes mistakes are made because of inexperience, or mistakes are made because the person overseeing the process, let's say myself, had not provided the proper amount of direction on how things should get done. So you need to have you need to take a look at yourself, and you need to make sure, am I providing the right leadership, the right mentorship? And that was, for me, that was a process over time. I'm sure if you interview a number of my colleagues from my Bear days, they will talk about one Steve Cunningham versus the Steve Cunningham that the people at Morgan Stanley met, versus the Steve Cunningham that the people at Deutsche Bank met, or the Steve Cunningham that the people at Nomura and BCP met. Alvaro Conto certainly speaks like that, and you can relate to him, because I think Alvaro will tell you, and Alvaro is, again, as you know, one of the top M&A bankers that I've worked with in my life. He will tell you that, Steve, I don't know where these stories come from about you at Bear Stearns. And so Alvaro's certainly seen a transformation.
And how much of this transformation came from the environment, and how much came from you wanting to change?
You know where it came from?
No, I don't.
It came from a heart-to-heart conversation with my wife.
Oh, really?
Came from a heart-to-heart conversation. She sat me down and she said, this behavior, this way that you are interacting has to stop. You're better than this. Okay? And I'm getting emotional. So that's where it came from.
Oh, you have to thank her from me as well, because her advice reached this
It came from
banker
her.
here.
It came from her. It came from her, and it came from a place of love.
Fantastic,
And
Steve.
then I adjusted my interactions and my behavior and the way I looked at things. And my colleagues, my close colleagues and friends had been bringing this up to me. But if you're asking me who brought me to where I needed to be, was my wife.
All
And there
right. So you
was and the
say,
beneficiaries of that were the people who I overlapped with still at Bear and then at Morgan Stanley and after that.
thank you for that. I want to close this section here because
Yes.
I just love that. Anything we say, I think we will spoil that moment, Steve.
Okay.
Você está interessado em mais informações de investment banking? Você conhece o site www.investmentbanking.com.br? Nesse site tem tudo o que você precisa saber para trabalhar em investment banking, inclusive como montar o seu equity story, a narrativa única para te conectar com uma vaga de investment bank. Confira. Steve, in this part of the podcast, I ask my guest to talk about transactions.
Yes.
So tell us about your transactions, any transaction from any point in time, those special to you by any reason.
Well, there's transactions that are special to me, sort of across the board, and it's always very hard to pick one transaction. I've been doing this for quite some time, for several decades, and so to try to find one transaction which encapsulates, sort of everything, it's very difficult. I mean, there've been a large number of debt transactions, a large number of equity transactions, a large number of M&A transactions, advisory transactions, restructuring transactions, convertible bond transactions, which is not a common product. And so it's hard. In thinking about this particular question, what I was trying to do is show to you and the audience, how one can learn from a negative experience and have it come back and become a positive experience, and how that sometimes all comes together. So one transaction that occurred to me that I'd like to discuss, started, during my Bear Stearns days, okay, and came to conclusion in my Deutsche Bank days. And I will explain how that happened. And, okay.
I'm excited.
All right. So in 1987, I was hired to represent a group of people, and one of the key individuals in that group was Garancia, the principals of Garancia, who were looking to buy a company which was called Atlantique do Brasil, or Arco do Brasil. This was 1987. Now, Arco do Brasil at the time was probably the fourth largest fuel distribution company in Brazil. Arco do Brasil had sent a $25 million dividend back to their parent company in Los Angeles for over 20 years. Arco do Brasil had 50 to 60 million bucks of EBITDA, no debt. Okay. Now this is 1987. And so a group of Brazilians hired me to advise them and to arrange financing for them to acquire this. And we were going to do this as a leverage buyout. All right. So we were going to add debt to this. And so I worked very, very hard, and it included working with, our colleague, our Ian Reed, for a number of months on looking for capital sources to allow that transaction to take place. Now think about it. No debt, 50 to 60 million bucks of EBITDA. One of the largest fuel distribution companies in Brazil. A $25 million dividend going back to the States, regularly for over 20 years. Right? But think about the time period, 1987. I went around, to different capital sources, local sources on the commercial lending side in Brazil. We don't do leverage buyouts. I went to the US. We don't do leverage buyouts in Brazil. I went to Europe. We don't do leverage buyouts. I went to Asia. I went to family offices. I went to private capital suppliers. who were starting to do leverage buyouts on a more regular basis in the United States or even in Europe. But Brazil, I mean, this is like, this was a step too far. After working very tirelessly with some equity resources and some non-traditional, if you will, and even some traditional financing resources, I started to put together a composition of capital providers that looked like I was going to be able to get the transaction done. It came from some was coming from a private family office, some was coming from a financial institution, and some was coming from some third-party capital sources. All right. Remember, I needed to raise a little less than 200 million to get this transaction done. And I was moving towards that. And then guess what happened? The market crash of 1987. If you look at your history of global finance, you will see that we had more than a little blip in 1987. Well, the few capital providers that I had found said, "Are you kidding? Are you kidding? A leverage buyout in 1987? No, Steve, we're out." So I couldn't get the deal done. I did not complete my transaction. I was very upset. I was disappointed in myself. I was upset that I had disappointed my clients in not being able to fulfill it, and I didn't get it done. So I learned quite a bit from that experience, and that was an experience where I did not complete the transaction. Right? Now, why did I want to talk about this? Because I think it's relevant both from a historical standpoint. I also think it's relevant that people learn from their failures or their mistakes or not being able to complete what they try to do. But they don't quit and they stay on top of things. So if we fast forward, as you know where I'm going here, 20 years later, let's take maybe 2007. Are you aware what happened in 2007, Jose Secarado?
I am.
You are aware. In 2007, Steve Cunningham, Ian Reed, and Jose Secarado are invited and receive a call from a consortium, which included Ultrapar, Braskem, Petrobras, and they want to acquire a group called Ipiranga.
Yeah.
And what is Ipiranga? Ipiranga includes a company called Arco do Brasil. It includes the fuel distribution business of Arco do Brasil, which Ipiranga had acquired in the interim.
All right. I didn't know
about.
What
do we end up doing? We end up advising all three on the fuel distribution for Ultrapar, on the fuel distribution for Petrobras, for parts of the north and the northeast, and on the petrochemical business, for Braskem and Petrobras. And so a $200 million transaction, which I was not able to complete in 1987, turns into a $4 billion or $4 billion plus transaction, multi-parties, including the assets of Arco do Brasil, which is now part of Ipiranga, in 2007.
Amazing. Yeah,
and you, my friend, played a critical and leading role in us getting that deal and getting that deal done successfully, to the mutual satisfaction of the management of Ultrapar, Braskem, and Petrobras.
Yeah, that was a great transaction, Steve. That was a great deal. Yeah.
So I could pick a lot of transactions. I could tell you about the multi-billion-dollar privatization of Telebras. I could tell you about the multi-billion-dollar privatizations of CPFL, CESP, Eletropaulo. We could talk about the IPO concurrent with the hybrid security for Embraer. Not something that one sees all the time. Type of transaction. There's a whole host of different. We could talk about Gol, the IPO of Gol. We could talk about Cosan. Cosan started. We could talk about Cosan. So let's talk about Cosan.
Cosan. I was going to ask about Cosan.
The Cosan people, interview banks and choose us because they decided that they want to raise debt. All right.
It was at Morgan Stanley, right?
It was at Morgan Stanley, correct. And we meet with Paulo Diniz, who was the CFO of Cosan at that particular point in time. And we convince him that we can raise international debt for Cosan. and we start to do our work, and we start to go out to the market, and we start a roadshow.
Just one second. COSAM was not listed at that point in time. It was a private company.
Correct. That's correct. That's correct.
Just to
That's
give
correct.
perspective. Yeah.
That's correct. That's correct. Now, and I mentioned to Paulo and to Rubens, okay, the controlling shareholder, that I think that at some point, COSAN should consider doing a public offering, an international public offering. And they say, yes, maybe at some point we'll think about that, Steve. So we start the roadshow for the debt deal.
Mm-hmm.
And I look at the audience, and to my surprise, the audience is made up of half fixed income, half equity investors globally.
All right.
And the equity investors grab Paulo Diniz after the roadshow and say, Mr. Diniz, has COSAN ever thought about raising equity? And so and that continues on and on and on, going through the debt offering process.
Mm-hmm.
So as soon as we get the debt offering done, as you can imagine, the internal conversations start to take place about, we need to think about going public internationally.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that came about because, you had, sugar, ethanol. I mean, when we started the process for COSAN was considered a sugar company. Then it became a sugar, alcohol, ethanol company. And sort of evolved as, from an investor standpoint, and the development of the group, way before obviously the acquisitions that the group did in a variety of other areas, be they, fuel distribution or logistics and other areas that the firm got into.
It was a bond or a convertible bond?
No, for COSAN it was a bond.
It was a bond.
Bond, then we did the equity.
So it was one bond issuance and then the IPO, and there was a follow-on after that, I think.
Yes.
All right. That's called repeat business, Steve.
Correct. Correct.
Tell me about the first
but then
IPO.
There's other deals. Then there's other deals, like standing in between in the merger of Antarctica and Brahma.
That's a good one. Yeah.
Okay. So what did I tell you? Going back to my Continental Bank days, who did I meet at Continental Bank?
You mentioned that
I met the guys at Banco Garantia. Okay.
Yeah.
They were, clearly the leaders in terms of investment banking in Brazil. And I had the great fortune of meeting Jorge Paulo Lemann, as I mentioned, Marcel Telles, Berto Secupira, Roberto Thompson, Claudio Haddad, Bon Cristiano, First Lambrano, Alex Barrett. There was a team of different people there, and I'm sure I'm missing some of them, but I got to know them going back to my Continental Bank days. They were also, we worked together on the acquisition of Arco do Brazil during my Bear days. Okay. And, we talked about doing a variety of different things, and we were helpful to them in a variety of different things. And so out of that and out of our advisory basis, came then the ability to work with them in the combination of Antarctica and Brahma.
That created Ambev.
Correct.
Yeah, some people don't know that, Steve.
Yes,
So
yes, I know that.
There's some young people listening to here that they don't know what Brahma and Antarctica was. So these were the two leading beer companies in Brazil, merged to create the Brazilian champion, and they had to come up with that term to claim that the competitive landscape of beers were global, not national. Otherwise, the CADE, the antitrust authorities in Brazil, would disapprove the transaction.
Correct.
Can you share a little bit more about this transaction? How did it started? Who had the idea?
No. The idea certainly, clearly came from the ex Garantia guys, or the Garantia guys. They had the idea. They had thought through the whole discussion. They had worked on the whole transaction very much on their own, and we were brought in near the end point, working with them to facilitate the ability to close it up. But it was primarily due to their initiative, thought process. They did, all the, strategic and tactical thinking on it. They deserve all the credit.
Okay, fantastic.
We played a role, but it was playing a role working for them and helping them facilitate their transaction.
And you work with these guys in several other transactions, including for Ambev, right?
Yes.
I remember we at Deutsche Bank, we advised them on a transaction in Central America,
Dominican Republic.
Dominican Republic, right? Yeah.
That's right.
And then
Ian
we
Reed.
work, Ian Reed.
Yeah.
We work with Lojas Americanas on a transaction in Mexico. It was fun times. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Steve. Can you tell me about the first IPO you worked on?
The very first one I worked on. I can. It's not Brazilian. Is that okay?
Yeah.
The very first, again, again, it's a little bit like the story I told you, and this is a good learning lesson for young people who will see this podcast. If at first you don't succeed, try again. Listen to this story. Are you ready?
Okay. Yeah.
In 1990,
okay,
I had done a number of restructurings of major Mexican corporations. And I had also done some debt capital raising for a number of Mexican corporations. And I could see and I could hear and I received international equity investors who had a strong interest in playing the Mexican equity market. So in 1990, I started to market Mexican groups to see who had an equity need and who would be prepared to tap into the international equity market.
All right.
And I was hired in 1990 by a Mexican group to do an equity offering in 1990. Unfortunately, by December 1990, there was not enough demand to get it done. So the group decided, let's wait, we'll revisit it in 1991. So a little bit like Arco do Brasil, but not the same. There was a book, but not the same book and the same strength to get it done. But I wanted to get it done in 1990, and I didn't. So then let's fast forward to 1991. I continued to market, and in 1991, a group called FEMSA.
I knew it.
FEMSA and I had a discussion, and a lengthy discussion during several months in the early part of 1991. And they agreed with me that they were ready to do an equity offering for the group.
All right.
That they had finished, a complicated, series of, restructurings in terms of their business. The business was going very, very well. And they were, and some of the original partners, potentially were looking to exit, in terms of the equity that they had in FEMSA. So the first deal that I did, of IPOs was for FEMSA, and it went extremely well.
Was it a Bear or Morgan Stanley?
It was a Bear.
No, that was Morgan Bear.
No,
all right.
It was a Bear. It was a Bear. Subsequently, on the FEMSA IPO, I IPO'd Coke FEMSA, which is, as you know, the largest Coke bottler in the Coke system.
Wow.
And also Ian Reed and myself and others played the role on the M&A advisory when Coca-Cola FEMSA bought Pan Amco, which has some of the largest operations in Brazil.
Okay.
But my first IPO was FEMSA. And this is a group that I had known for a long time, that I had marketed a long time, that on a variety of different products, but particularly on the equity side. And through the good graces of the family and the senior management and their belief in our knowledge base of the opening up of the international equity markets to issues coming out of Latin America, they had the confidence and the faith in me to allow me to be the lead underwriter, the lead left book runner, to launch my first equity underwriting in, I want to say it was April, May of 1991.
Fantastic, Steve. Thank you for sharing all these transactions.
Se você está gostando do que você está ouvindo, você tem que acompanhar os nossos outros canais nas mídias sociais. O primeiro é óbvio. Você já me segue lá no LinkedIn? José Roberto Securato Júnior. Tá como José Securato. Me manda uma mensagem, fala que você ouviu o podcast. Eu vou gostar de saber um pouquinho sobre você.
Now, we are at that part of the program that we get to know about Mr. Steve Cunningham. Tell me something about you that is not on your LinkedIn.
Well, there's a lot of stuff that is not on my LinkedIn.
Well, tell me something that is surprising or interesting.
What's not on my LinkedIn, and I don't know how surprising it is, but separate and apart from the business side of things, is that I am a crazy sports fan.
All right.
And I mean a crazy sports fan in that people don't want to be anywhere near me when my team is playing and my team is losing, my teams, but particularly one team in particular. So I am a big sports fan of American football, baseball, basketball, and some other sports. I like soccer, but not to the same degree. And my number one sport is American football.
Okay.
And my number one team in American football are the New York Giants.
Okay.
It's an American football team based around here. And what people who don't know me very well, and certainly those who only know me through LinkedIn don't know, is that I am a fanatical Giants fan. And that could be a good or a bad thing. It's a bad thing the last 15 years because they haven't been very good.
Okay.
So I can be a pretty difficult person when the Giants are playing and after the Giants lose for the 12th, 13th, or 14th time.
But like, do you go to the stadium or do you watch at home?
No.
What's your routine?
I don't go to the stadium because I'm such an unpleasant person when they're losing. I don't want to. I can't expose myself to other people.
Do you have a routine? Like, what do you do when the Giants are playing?
I have a routine.
Do you wear the jersey?
I have myself in my room with my television screen. My wife knows that there might be a lot of yelling, screaming, and swearing.
Okay.
The dogs know the same thing, and and occasionally my wife will say, turn off the television. You shouldn't watch the game. But that's my routine from the time the game starts till the time the game's over.
Fantastic. Yeah, I didn't know that.
I try not to take calls. I try not to take texts. I try to divorce myself from everything.
All right.
Você sabia que nesse livro, De Cabeça no Mercado Financeiro, os 6 passos para se tornar um banker, tem tudo que você precisa saber sobre carreira no mercado financeiro? Aqui eu falo sobre as principais carreiras, como é que elas são diferentes. Eu trago um capítulo que ficou sensacional com os diários, o diário de um banker, o diário de uma analista de research, o diário de um banker de sales. Para você conhecer o que será que faz sentido para você. Vale a pena você consultar.
And this is a tradition in our podcast at Diário de Banker that the previous guest leave a question for the next guest. Right. But they don't know, like, you're going to leave a question for the next guest, but I'm not going to tell you who that person is. So this is not personal. And the question I have for you is, I am translating from Portuguese, is who outside business and family, who is a role model to you and why?
Okay. I have 2, if that's okay. But they're not family, and they're not, first of all, would be family, but you told me I had to exclude it. So you've already heard what I said about my wife. So I've taken her out of this answer. But there are 2 people that had a major impact on me. First is a gentleman who's no longer here by the name of Phil Cohen. And you say, who is Phil Cohen? Well, Phil Cohen was a teacher, but he was also a football coach, an American football coach. And he was my football coach. And he taught me so many lessons as a young person about life, about myself, about college, about my own development, and it has had a major impact on me all my life. So he was the first one, and he had a major impact on me. I mean, he went above and beyond. He would take my tape. He took tapes of my games. He sent them to universities and said, you must recruit this person. And a couple of them did. And a couple of them even gave me football scholarships. But that's what he did for me, as I'm graduating. What he did for me as he was my coach. And he did it under unusual circumstances. he coached our team he took us from a team that was not very good to the #1 team. And he did it during a year when, near the end of the season, at the very critical topic, his daughter died in a tragic automobile accident. And he was able to manage through that. And so to watch a man, as your leader, as your coach, as your inspiration, deal with that and how he dealt with that, it's always stayed with me. The second was the president of my undergraduate alma mater, a gentleman by the name of Frank Newman. Now, Frank Newman and I became, very close friends, and he became a mentor to me in many different ways. When I was an undergraduate, I became president of the student government, the student body. And Frank was the president of the university. So as a result, we interacted a lot together in terms of the development, the growth, the interaction with the government, who was one of the funding sources, and many different things, athletics, all sorts of things. And we got quite close, and I learned an enormous amount from Frank. But let me tell you something else that Frank did. As I was graduating, I wasn't sure what to do. I had job offers. I was thinking about going for a PhD in economics. Frank Newman sat me down and he said, I know you, Steve. You should get an MBA. And I know where you should go. You should go to Columbia. I want you to study for the MBA, take the GMATs, and apply for your MBA, and strongly consider Columbia. And I'll write a recommendation for you to Columbia. I'll write it for your other schools too. But that's what I think you should do. He was right. It's because of Frank Newman that I ended up going into business, and I ended up going to Columbia. But he taught me a lot of other life lessons.
Fantastic, Steve. That's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing that. Steve, it was a pleasure to have you here in the Diário de Banker. It's an amazing story. I know you for so long already, and it's a privilege to have worked for you and calling you friend. And I hope we have many more conversations like this. It's inspiring. It's educating. It's really a blessing.
Jose, I want to thank you. I obviously want to, thank your producer, Larissa, as well. But I want to thank you. I want to thank you for our friendship. I want to thank you for introducing me to Camilla, who is amazing. Also your brother, who's also amazing. But the personal friendship, both outside of work as well as within work. I consider you one of my, closest friends, but I also consider you, one of the top professionals that I've come across in 40 years. And it is an honor and a privilege for me to call you my friend.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you very much.